Hey everyone. Welcome back to the Built to Last show. I have got a friend of mine. We are catching up after a little while of connecting with each other. I think we first connected myself and Megan Ketchigan. So we got two Megans today. We've got Megan K and Megan H today. I think we connected a couple years ago. It's one of those things where you see somebody on Facebook and you really love their content, and you love what they're about. And it's like, hey, we should probably connect, get to know each other, and we've just stayed in touch online with each other, supporting one another's body of work. So I'm really excited, Megan, to have you on the show and dive into what I know is going to be a really valuable and fruitful conversation for our audience. So welcome to the Built to Last show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to finally be here.
Yeah, sweet. Well, I always like to start out with, what led you to the body of work that you are diving into today? So let's kind of go back to the beginning. Why are you doing what you're doing today, and what led you to it?
Yeah. So I feel like it really wasn't my choice. It was just a calling that I couldn't ignore. And it just made sense because I'm really not a risk taker. That is not how anyone would define me. And so when I started this business, it was just kind of like, what? But the pieces made sense to me, and it was like kind of like the scary but aligned thing to do. And now 6 years later into this, just really loving the work that I get to do with my clients as a copywriter, and even in the age of AI and Chat GPT and all those things, which of course is a powerful tool, um, really seeing it also, like, brings out the magic of the work we do together because, like, we go deep. I bring out ask those strategic questions, and that's a common thing that my clients say to me is like, "Oh, I love the questions that you ask because you really get to the heart of what I'm actually trying to say. Or you help me articulate the thing that I've been trying to say, but I haven't actually said it that way before." So it's just a really beautiful way to, I feel like, love on people, but in a way that is like for their business, for their mission, pulling out their message that they get to do. And so in my previous life, I was a high school teacher, and so I feel like so many of those skills are transferable. And I work a lot with course creators, podcasters, and so I feel like those are educators. Those are still it's in the education world and realm. Um, and so it's just been such a wonderful way to kind of transfer my skill set and grow beyond, and really help people in the way that feels most aligned and most energizing to me as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Not only do Megan and I have the same name and we spell it the same way, but we also have the same background. I was a teacher as well. You were an English teacher, right?
I was actually high school physics and math.
Physics and math.
Yeah.
I guess I
English would have made
connected
more
copywriting
sense
with
for
English,
copywriting, but
right? Okay.
but I do
So,
appreciate the data and the formulas, which copywriting is also data and formulas in a different
yeah.
way. So,
I agree with you. And being a teacher, I was interviewing a guy who I know he's the COO of an extremely large scale mastermind style of a company in the real estate investing space. He was also he was a middle school math teacher for I think about 15 years. And we were talking about the same thing. I was like, you went from being a teacher to being a COO, and we got into the conversation around how much the teaching profession actually really prepared us for entrepreneurship and doing what we're doing with our adult clients. I think that's such an interesting conversation. I'd love to hear from you, Megan. Like you mentioned, a lot of the skills teaching are transferable over to the work that you're doing today, whether that's, and kind of go a little deeper. Do you mean skills transferred into running a business or skill transfer into communicating with your clients eh, or mastering your craft? I mean, those are all different categories. I'd love to hear your take on that.
yeah. So I think it's a little bit of all of the above, really. I think for me, what I loved most about teaching was really connecting with my students. And so many people say, like, high school students, like teenagers, like, good for you, but not for me. Um,
I heard the same thing, and I love that age. I don't know what to do with kindergartners through 5th grade. Like, don't give me them. I don't know what to do.
yeah, they don't have a rational brain yet. And high schoolers, I
Exactly.
mean, don't act like they do all the time, but they do to some extent, more so at least. And I just really loved that age. And for me, I taught the content, of course, I taught them the physics, I taught them the math, I taught them the algebra, all those things, but it was never like really about that. It was always about something deeper. And like that is why I think, I had kids who came to my class at lunchtime, who would hang out in my room during break, who would talk to me and like bring to me like the real things, the real things that they were going through, the real, you know, gossip that was hurting them and how to handle it. And, so and so did this and like, what do I do? And I really loved that, like, I don't know, physics was the surface level conversation, but they learned to enjoy physics because we had that deeper level relationship. Um, and so if I'm going to make this analogy with copywriting, like it's not necessarily about like the features of your program or how you execute, the thing that you do, but it's really the best copywriting is about connecting more deeply with your people. So my students in the case of teaching or your audience in the case of being a business owner, and how are you relating to them? Because when they're like, oh my gosh, your story is like my story too, then there's so much trust built between you. And there's so much like this camaraderie, even if they've never met you before, if that even makes sense. And that level of connection is so powerful. And that is a prerequisite to conversion. Because if you go straight for conversion copy without ever connecting with them before, people don't, especially in this day and age where buyers are more and more discerning, like even if your conversion copy is on point, if you haven't yet really connected with them, like people want to know who they are buying from. I think in this
Okay,
space
so I
event.
love this. I love this where this conversation is going around. We have to have conversion copy, obviously, and then there's got to be connection copy. Can you compare and contrast the two? Give us some examples. And, when you're running a business and the idea is like we're making as many sales as we can, as often as we can, what is the kind of balance between connection copy, conversion copy, knowing that ideally you've got new people who are strangers coming into the fold very, very often who don't know you at all. So, yeah, talk to us about that. This sounds like a really interesting topic for our audience.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I would say connection copy is heavier top of funnel. When people are just coming into your world, they want to know who you are and be like, oh, this is a person I want to stick around. This is, one of the people I want to surround myself with and be influenced by and that kind of thing. And connection copy can oftentimes look like stories, whether that is, like your origin story, how you got into business, that kind of thing. Or it can even just be like your day-to-day stories, like things that are happening in your life, a lesson you learned from like this random, silly, ordinary thing that happened to you, like at the grocery store or whatever it is. I think so many times when people say, like, oh, I know I'm supposed to tell stories in my business, but like I don't have this like big transformational story to tell, or my life is so boring, or like I'm so vanilla, like I just don't have anything to, my story's not interesting. And it's just like you can truly make like those ordinary moments in your life, like that is what is relatable for everyone. Not everyone can relate to like overcoming cancer or like these big things like we think we need to have in our story. Um, just the day to day of like the silly thing that your kids did and how you responded, or like a lesson you learned like while folding laundry. Like it could be so simple to be able to connect with people, and like that's what is relatable because we all have those ordinary moments. So I would say don't shy away from like talking about something that maybe you think is boring, but there's ways that you can spice it up, obviously without over embellishing, but like make it a hook, make it something interesting. What is this sharp insight that you got from it? And then weave that into your call to action. So if it's, it could be, to follow you on Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is, or, as we get further down, maybe it's taking the next step with you. So I would say conversion copy is a little more like buyer psychology infused into it, heavier on stronger calls to action to really show your leadership, with those calls to action. And yeah, a combination of buyer psychology, industry expertise, is really what brings in more of the conversion copy.
Okay, so when we're talking about the more of the stories, the relatable things, the mundane, everyday, ordinary activities that every single one of us are doing every day, is it, do you, I don't want to use the word have to. Does it make sense from a marketing perspective, right? Like we are all running businesses, right? Um, does it make sense from a marketing perspective? Do we want to tie that ordinary story into who the ideal client is, the problem that we solve, the result that we're helping someone achieve? Or is it just like a rando story that we're sharing just to be relatable?
So it's not necessarily random. The story might feel random at first of like, what is this? But I mean, I'm thinking about the past few people that I've really felt connected with. It's like we bonded as humans first before we started talking business. And we bonded over picking weeds in our garden, making sourdough from scratch, and being a Swiftie, but we didn't get to go to the Eras Tour concert.
But how
So
did you know that about each other? Just from like stories on Instagram or posts on Facebook? Like, how did you know that about each other?
so one was through a networking group, and the Swiftie thing was like her fun fact, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so just like reached out over that silly little thing first, and then feeling that connection, being like, okay, hey, look, we have the same audience. Maybe a collaboration makes sense for us. Or, tell me more about what you do, and, just see where that leads or not leads. But it starts the conversation, and it puts you more on the path to like, I don't know, it just makes business more fun too. And then like the other one was just like a random like story posted on, I think it was Facebook. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm at the age where picking weeds is absolutely therapeutic for me too. Being remote and online and digital all day, like having something to do with my hands and being off screen is like so refreshing. And we just like totally bonded over that. And then it was like similar with the sourdough thing. Like I'm gluten-free, but I still make sourdough bread for my family because
Right.
I love doing something with my hands after, being on a screen for most of the day.
Yeah. So human connection first, conversion connection second.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Awesome. So I want to go back to something that you were bringing up in your initial story around AI,
Mhm.
ChatGPT. Talk to us about where that's headed, and you know what are some way like does is it helpful to use AI and things like ChatGPT? To what degree should we be using it? Um, I don't, I'm not an expert in that category. I use it. I certainly use it to create some of my copy, especially my more conversion type of copy. I certainly use ChatGPT with things like if I want an outline for something, or things like that. They're a bit more cerebral, because what I've noticed is it just massively speeds up my productivity on things like that. I
Mhm.
don't really so much use it. Obviously, it doesn't know me and my personal story, so it's not going to write a story for me. But how do you see any of us? Like, look, if we don't have a copywriter on our team, or we haven't hired a copywriter, we are the copywriter. And I
Mhm.
imagine that a lot of people listening to this, they probably are the content creator, whether it's video or it's a podcast or it's written. And I'm sure you have heard this too. I know in my circle of influence and friends, one of the biggest areas of frustration and time consumption is, oh my gosh, I have to keep coming up with and creating more and more content. And I have seen people literally either take a sabbatical in their business because that is the thing that they were so tired of doing, or I've
Mhm.
seen people completely shut their business down and build a completely different business from scratch because they got so tired of the rat race of constantly keeping up with content creation. So I think we can go in two different directions.
Mhm.
One, I'm very curious about your perspective on AI and things like ChatGPT. And then I'm also really curious about your perspective of this whole, you know, feeling that people are having just being completely burned out with keeping up with content online.
Yeah. Yeah. So, oh my gosh, where do I begin with all my thoughts on
Start
this?
with the AI. Start with the AI ChatGPT stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you said, for sure, it is a powerful tool, absolutely. And I think if you shun it completely, then yeah, it can feel hard to keep up and you're missing out on like some of the great benefits of it. At the same time, if you swing like radically to the other side of the spectrum and you rely on it to produce literally everything, then it's like, well, people can tell. um, and then also you are not flexing your creative muscle, your writing muscle. And when you don't use your muscle, you're an athlete too, right? Like it atrophies, it diminishes. And so, I mean, AI is 2-ish years old now. And so I think even in a couple years, we can start seeing like, I don't know, people do we know how to think for ourselves anymore, or do we just know how to ask ChatGPT? And like, do we have the critical thinking to say, is this even correct? Is this even aligned with where I'm going and what I want to do? Or am I just doing it because this super smart robot tells me to do it? So obviously there's a little bit of discernment there. So how can we find this like happy medium, I guess, where like we do want to leverage this powerful tool, but I think not overuse it to the point where we lose ourselves and our creative muscles at the same time. So I actually just did a whole podcast episode on this. But I am similar to you in that I think it is great for ideation. I think it is great for brainstorming, just kind of being a sounding board for you. um, for me, it has helped stop the overthinking everything. And because it just gives me, you know, these ideas, and I can quickly say, okay, these are the ones that I actually want to work with, and boom, just go and roll with those. Like you said, I think using it to outline an email sequence, outline your blog post, outline even an email that you're writing can be great because it gives you structure. And then you are filling in that structure with your own voice, with your own words, with your own heart that you're really putting out there. So, yeah, I think to continue to use it as a tool and not the end all be all is the way to go. It can for sure help you synthesize if you have a lot of data, if you need to summarize something, like use it that way. But to use it for all of your content, I don't know if I would go there. And even when I do like feel that I'm in a time crunch, oh my gosh, I really want to, pump this blog post out quick. The prompt that I give it is like a mile long.
Mm,
Like it is very in depth. Like it is probably a page-ish or more, page and a half long of a prompt that I give it. And that prompt is very thoughtful because I have already analyzed my voice. It comes from my brand voice messaging guide that I have personally built. ChatGPT cannot build that for me. It is coming from like looking at my best performing content, look at my highest performing emails and subject lines, telling from the data, okay, what is working, and then feed that to it. So there is still a ton of deeper heart work and data work that needs to be done before I feel like ChatGPT can like truly actually be effective for you. Because sure, it can help you churn out the content hamster wheel, but then is it actually converting? And if it's not, then like, what's the point of like running in this rat race? So I would say pause and slow down a second. Really think about your marketing like back up and look at your marketing and content strategy as a whole first. What feels aligned to you and what doesn't? What can you let go? what's converting for you and what really isn't like giving you an ROI on your time, marketing wise. Audit that first. And this is actually the first step in my 3M roadmap process. We even take a look like, if we want to get off the hamster wheel, like maybe we can let some things go. um, that would be first, and like then pour that more into the thing that is working the best. But we have to step back and analyze that first. So there you go, looking at data, looking at numbers. There's my physics background coming in, right? Then once you have that, we can analyze your voice, your tone, your personality through the writing that you have already put out there and is working for you and is converting. And so once we have that defined and your messaging guide built out and your ideal client like built out and we know exactly who they are, then honestly, it is almost faster or just as fast to write those emails, to write, the content yourself because you know your messaging. When you know your messaging, the writing comes so much faster and so much easier. And like when I write for myself, I'm just like, why would I use Chat GPT? Because I know my messaging and I know my ideal client so well that like I am now pumping out like when I batch my emails, I write an email every, in 10 minutes. And I hear other people who are like writing a blog or a LinkedIn post and they're like, it took me 2 hours to write this one post. And then, like it only has a lifespan of like not even 24 hours on the algorithm and then it get lost. And like, is this worth my time? So part of my 3M roadmap is like, okay, well, if you're going to spend that much time on content, let's have a repurposing strategy so that it actually like makes sense and is worth your time. Let's put it in the channels that are actually working for you and be okay letting go of the channels that maybe aren't working for you right now. Maybe you can add them back in later, but for now, let's make it simple. Let's make it sustainable. Because yes, you can do all the things, but if you are not acting like an unhurried CEO visionary and you're acting like a, chicken running around with your head cut off, like that is not, that's not the look that we're going for. So yeah, so we simplify, take a step back and really focus on the depth of your message and getting that out there and amplifying that and what's working before we feel like, oh my gosh, we have to do all these things and this, hamster wheel that we just, can't keep up with by definition and it can't get off of. So,
When I was saying I've heard so many people over the last 2 to 3 years just talk about being so burned out from keeping up with the content creation hamster wheel. I think you really nailed it with what you said around, it's taking people an hour and a half to 2 hours to write a single post. And if that's what you're doing every single day, and again, to your point, the lifespan of a post is very, very short. I
mhm.
think that's where people are getting like frustrated and disgruntled. And then you said something else around being clear on your message and how like you could write
Yes.
an email in 10 minutes because you're clear on your message. I was even chatting just in Facebook DMs with someone who I know last night and early this morning. She and her husband have a successful business. They are not struggling. They've got two different businesses in two different industries. So they built a business first, and then they created a coaching education company around what they had built, and now they're teaching
Mhm.
people how to do that. And what she said to me, she was actually listening to a Facebook Live that I had done on something. I think it was like growing your Facebook group community with more members in 30 days. And she was sharing with me, she goes, the thing that I have been really struggling with is my message. And when she said that to me, Megan, I was like, you guys have two businesses and you are so successful and you are struggling with your message. And so I was just kind of sharing with her, like, yeah, I think we all struggle with that. Here's what helped
Yeah.
me kind of like just really laser focus, hone in. But here's where I'm curious. We hear the word your message used all the time. Like it's tossed around everywhere. I I don't believe that people are actually really clear on what that means. So when you
Mm.
say get clear on your message, what do you mean by that? Can you like when all of us are like, I got to get clear on my message. What are we actually getting clear on?
That is such a good question, and no one has ever asked me that before. But you're right. I think it is a term that like is thrown around out there. And maybe, yeah, people aren't super clear on like, well, what is this? What actually
I
do we
think
mean
there's
by this?
lots of different definitions of that based on
Yeah.
our own interpretation of what that word means.
Yeah.
But I want to hear it like, what's your definition of it such that any of us could be so laser focused, success blinders on with this is the thing I'm talking about, and every single piece of my content, every piece of content I'm putting out there, I can just sit down and I'm so clear. It takes me 10, 15 minutes and I'm not wavering, questioning, second guessing, doubting, all the swirls of things and then re-editing my post 89 times. Help us get there.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that, let me gather my thoughts here. So your messaging in marketing is, so I have a messaging guide. And so in that we collect the themes that you talk about, the language that you use to communicate with your audience. And that language often comes from like, it's the audience's language that we are now using in our marketing back to them. So it is looking at those golden threads, themes of testimonials and feedback that you've gotten. What are people saying about you and how are they saying it? How are they describing their before and after transformation? We are using that language and we are noting that language in the messaging guide so that we can then use it back in our marketing. Messaging is how you articulate who you are, if you're a personal brand, or who your business is, what you stand for, and what you offer in a way that resonates. So, yes, it's the specific words that you use, but it's also more than that. It's how you are making people feel, what you want them to remember about you. And this is a big one, how you differentiate yourself from others in your field. A lot of people are not super clear on what differentiates them. They want to help people, they want to have impact, they know that this is the way to do it, but they don't pause to really articulate, well, I'm looking at you and I'm looking at, so and so who is also, what you do, a business coach, a health coach, whatever you do. And so if your sales page, if your marketing messaging doesn't tell them, well, why are you different? Why are they better suited for your solution than, someone else who is your competitor, so to speak, then it's harder for them to choose you if that is not articulated and articulated well. So I would say your messaging is an accumulation of your value prop, clearly communicating what you do, who you do it for, and how it benefits them. It includes your brand voice, the tone and style that you use to deliver these messages. It reflects your personality. It reflects your values is a huge one. And when this is written down in a guide, it's a good like reference for you when you're creating content. And if and when you ever hire out marketing or a copywriter to give this to them, oh my gosh, as a copywriter, let me tell you, like, it makes things so much easier. It makes things so much more seamless for me to take on your voice and not have anyone like your husband won't be able to tell the difference. Your mom won't be able to tell the difference. That is not you writing it. Okay, so let me rewind. Your messaging includes your value proposition, your brand voice, the core themes. Um, so people might call this like content pillars, but you're like, how do I even come up with that? So like, what are the recurring ideas that you keep talking about or that your audience keeps asking about? What are your unique differentiators? What sets you apart from the competition? That could be your process. That could be your values. That could be your results. We bring in an emotional appeal as well. Obviously, copywriting has to be empathetic. It has to connect with them emotionally before they buy. We need to inspire trust and loyalty before they will take action with you. And then I think good messaging also includes thinks about your calls to action. What specific phrases do you say to guide your audience on what to do next? And I think most people don't think about this, but as a copywriter working with a range of different types of voices from very feminine, intuitive to like very bro, masculine, aggressive, and everything in between, are you making your call to action more of an invitation or more of like a hey, book now, urgency, FOMO type of a call to action? Which one on that spectrum feels right to you and your brand? That is something that needs to be defined in your messaging. And when you get this all down, and don't just let it live in your head, put it on paper, put it on a Google Doc. Um, and this is why I include my messaging guide template in my copy critique club offer, because like I can't truly like critique your offers or give you feedback if I don't like have this background. If I don't know who I'm talking to, if I don't know like who you are on like a slightly deeper level. Because when you have this messaging down, then you have clarity. Your audience will immediately understand what you offer, why it matters to them, why should they even care. It builds that connection that we talked about earlier on in the episode and that emotional alignment. It's consistency so that you are cohesive across your website, your emails, your podcasts, wherever you show up, reinforcing your presence and your reliability. And lastly, conversion, I think would be, obviously that is what we're ultimately going for here, but this is kind of the foundation that you need to have in order for conversion to happen. When you clearly communicate how you're solving their problems and what steps they need to take to do that, then conversion, is primed to happen. You can make
Yeah,
conversion more inevitable by having these steps done.
I'd love for you to like use yourself as an example. I think you're accurate with what you were saying around it is very challenging for us to know how to differentiate ourselves from the 50,000 other people who do the same thing we do, right? Like I am not the only business coach who helps people get more clients using organic strategies, right?
Right.
There we're like a dime a dozen. You are not the only copywriter. Like we could go scroll around on Facebook for 10 minutes and probably go find like 10 different copywriters we could go hire tomorrow. And to the outside person looking in, we all, every copywriter does the same thing. Every business coach does the same thing. So I'd love to
Right.
hear like a real life example. How do you as a copywriter differentiate, like what differentiates you from every other copywriter that we could work with?
Yeah. Okay. This is so good. I think examples for sure help illustrate it rather than talking about it more on a higher level. So, one practical exercise that audience, you can do this right now, right after this episode, is look at your competitors' content, website, sales pages, whatever, and what kind of like triggers you about it? What makes you feel like, okay, yes, but this, and this is how I think about it. And so what you're looking for is like, when you see it in the context of someone else who does what you do, it's easier to see how you do it differently. So that can be reinforcing your process more. This works because I follow my 3M roadmap where we work on your messaging, what we've been talking about, your mapping, how is this actually going to play out? And then your marketing is the third M, which by that I mean the actual implementation and execution of like making this all happen. And by following that process, because so many, I think for me, there's a lot of copywriters who will just write the copy for you. And it's nice to have a human writing it rather than a robot who can like get you. And sure, that's nice, but I go deeper than that. I do more than that because I also look at your marketing strategy as a whole and make sure everything makes sense. Because in my early days as a copywriter, before I did this, I had too many experiences where, like, I can think of an example where I wrote ads for a client and then they didn't want to work together anymore. I was like, okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And they're like, well, actually, your ads like performed great. They got the clicks. So I was like, well, great. Like my copy did its job. And then so I was like, so like what happened? And they're like, well, someone else internally like wrote the sales page, which wasn't great, and then the emails were just kind of like a mishmash thrown together. I don't know if they were like automated correctly. And it's like they didn't have all the other pieces in place. So it didn't matter how great the ad copy was because they didn't have the emails, because they didn't have the sales page in place. And so like similarly, there was another client who like I wrote what like was a great sales page and he really loved it. And it's like, oh, I felt like, this was great. It's really going to connect with my audience. So I'm like, okay, awesome, let's do it. And then, a couple weeks later, we circled back and check in, and it was like, well, there hasn't really been, many conversions on it. It's like, okay, well, how many people are seeing this page? Like, how are you getting traffic to it? And he was like, well, maybe just like a handful of people have seen it. It's like, well, there's the problem. So that is why I now like sure work with a business coach. Like I'm not a business coach. Um, but I also take a look at that strategy. I think your copywriter needs to be in on the strategy to some extent in order for conversion copy to flow more easily and to make sense. Like if you're just writing this one isolated thing, it's harder to make it convert versus if you have the full picture of where they're coming from, top of funnel, to how they're being nurtured, to how they are being, asked to take out their credit card, and taking that holistic viewpoint and having the marketing strategy and messaging strategy background, I think makes me different. And if I can toot my own horn, a better copywriter than those who just can produce nice, pretty words on a page that sound good, but may fall flat because it doesn't have the buyer psychology in there. They may not have the expertise in your industry or know how or be willing to do all the research that it takes to understand your voice, to look at all of your, past high performing content, to binge, who you are in terms of your content on the internet already, so that you can make a seamless transition and continue that, and no one, is going to be the wiser. And when the client looks back, they're like, wait, did you write this or did I write this? When did you come on board? Because that sounds like me, but I don't think I wrote that. So that is the ultimate compliment as a copywriter.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction for everybody to hear when you are out. If you're ever going to hire a copywriter, or even if you're going to, you know, hire someone like Megan or bring someone internally onto your team. I have, different friends over the years in the industry who are copywriters as well. And I remember one of my copywriter friends who I worked with on a team way back in the day when we both worked for a large scale coaching company. Um, I have heard her say, I spend about 30% of my time writing, 70% of my time researching. And I
Yes.
think that is a huge distinction that you just made about yourself, Megan. There are so many marketers doing the copywriting or copywriters doing the copywriting, and they are not spending more than an hour long onboarding session asking you questions and extracting things from you. They are not spending the hours,
Mm-hmm.
continuous hours that it takes to really like learn how to eat, breathe, sleep, speak your voice and your message. And it is heaps and heaps and heaps of research. So, anyone
Yes.
listening who's on the prowl for a copywriter, make sure that's one of the questions you're asking people when you are vetting them out and you're interviewing them. Don't just hire the first person who tells you, I can do this for you. Because in order for someone, like Megan is saying, to speak as though it is you and your spouse cannot even tell that it's not you writing, that is not, it's not enough for the person to be a good copywriter. It's not enough for them to have an hour long onboarding session with you to try to pull your message out of you. They need to be spending hours researching you, binging you, researching your competitors as well, just like you said. That's a huge job. So that's a very important interview question to be asking. Like, find out what their process is. And if you do not like what you hear and they are not, spending 70% of the time researching, 30% of the time writing, so to speak, on to the next, on to the next.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that about you, Megan. Just your integrity behind that as well, because I think
Yeah.
that, we're in this age where, look, we're human beings. We are driven by wanting more. We want more clients, more money, more this, more that. And I know that you really do take great quality care of your clients, which is why they get such incredible results with you. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know for me in my process, I have already binged all of your podcasts, all of your YouTube channel, like all of your online content before we get on our first onboarding call, because I don't want to waste your time. Half the reason or more why people hire a copywriter is not because they're bad at writing. Like you've already had some level of success and you've got there by writing your own copy. And now it's time to like pass the reins on so you can focus and have the mental space to be that visionary CEO that you need to be for your company, for your business. And so I don't want to waste your time on the call. So I have already spent hours binging all of your content before we ever get on a call together, so that on the call, you never have to repeat to me something you're like, well, like just check out this podcast episode, like this is already out there. And that is how I can ask really good questions that is going to pull out of you the things that you never thought to say before, or the things that you wanted to articulate, but it's just not like coming out yet. And we get so much deeper into like your message and what you're trying to say. Um, it's good. It's really good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, Megan. So for anyone looking to bring on a copywriter like you, where's the best place for people to follow you, find you, learn from you, and potentially connect deeper with you?
Yes. So the best place to follow me and find me would be on my podcast, which is Copywriting for Coaches. You can go to just find it on Apple, Google, wherever you find your podcasts, or go to copywritingforcoachespodcast.com. And then that will bring you to all the links, all the things to connect deeper. There are so many things we talked about here today where I was like, oh, I have a podcast episode on that. I have a podcast episode on that. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, definitely go take a look at Copywriting for Coaches podcast to go a little bit deeper.
Amazing. Awesome, Megan. Well, this has been super enlightening, very helpful. And I really love how we ended, because I think that oftentimes we don't know what questions to be asking when we're vetting working with someone. So I just think that's so important, and be very, very clear on exactly what you're looking for and exactly the type of person you want to work with, how invested you want them to be. And if you are that person who's gone through a lot of different marketers or a lot of different copywriters, I see that often from folks at the seven figure level. It's like they're just churning
Yes.
through people every 3 months because they are not doing what you just said you do. So, Megan,
Mm-hmm.
thanks so much for being with us today. This was awesome and so informative.
Yes, I appreciate the wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Until next time, everyone, remember to design a business and life that's built to last.